Welcome to the Hammer Museum. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Education, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's talk by artist Victoria Reynolds. As most of you know, 2 weeks ago we opened our new exhibition, 9 Lives, Visionary Artists of Los Angeles, curated by Ali Subotnick. Anyhow, the show is absolutely incredible, and one of the highlights is the room full of luscious, glistening, tempting portraits of raw flesh by Victoria Reynolds. They're both carnal and divine, simultaneously both beautiful and repulsive, especially if you are vegetarian. Victoria exhibits her work internationally, and it's been featured in Art in America, Frieze, Art Forum, Harper's, Meat Paper, and the New York Times Magazine. She also teaches painting at Cal State Northridge and lives here in LA. Victoria grew up in Tyler, Texas, famous for its rose gardens and its grisly, high-profile murders. Could this have been an influence on her work? You be the judge. Please join me in welcoming Victoria Reynolds.
Well, thank you for coming. Go ahead and start right in. Yes. Here's one of my favorite meat paintings or flesh paintings, which might be more politically correct these days to say. Yeah, it's one of my favorites because it has this endless movement and it's a cropped image. And a lot of people ask me, well, why meat? Why do you paint meat? And what went before the meat? Well, I used to paint ice cream and I used to get into all these gory details, and the banana splits and the cones started getting really messy. So I'll show you a couple of those a little bit later. But for now, this painting is entitled Uteri, which is pork uterus, which I got at the Chinese market. But to kind of further dance around the topic of why I paint meat these days, I mean, I've been doing this for about 10 years and, you know, constantly kind of exploring why I'm fascinated with meat, you know, what draws me in, what's fascinating and a little bit repulsive, and, you know, what draws me in and what draws other people in, apparently. So, you know, art historically, I have a lot of, you know, examples in terms of, in my own mind. I'll only show you one. But art historically, this was painted in 1551. And it's by Peter Erickson. And it's one of those genre paintings of these butcher stall scenes. There are, you know, hundreds of butcher stall scenes, laid tables, kitchen scenes, things like that. You know, the hanging game. You know, the dead fowl that's hanging on a wall, for instance. But this one's called, let's see here, the title for it, A Meat Stall with the Holy Family Giving Alms. And you can see them, you know, behind this cluster of meat that's pressed up to the surface for this real feeling of immediacy. You see the Holy Family tucked in the background in that empty space just beyond the cod, I don't know. But there's Mary kind of giving something to the poor below her, you know, some child maybe down there. But, you know, this is an early meat painting, and we've all seen those. You know, this seems a little bit more celebratory than some of the other historical paintings that I was talking about. It kind of depended on, you know, whether there was a 30 years war that had just happening, and then everything got really Protestant and stern and saying, okay, enjoy the good life, but death is coming. But sometimes it was more of a plethora of, you know, a good abundance of things. It kind of depended in Holland, in that general area, these different Protestant paintings. And other art historical references. Just the other day I was looking at Leonardo, of all people, Leonardo da Vinci, and I found out that he's a vegetarian and very much for animal rights in all ways. He would actually go to the market stalls sometimes and pay for the birds within the cages, and then he'd set them free right there. Because, you know, he's a vegetarian, and he was always, even very often, talking in terms of likening humans to animals and saying that we are animals. And I have a really great quote here. He wrote these, what he called his prophecies, in Italian, of course, but this is translated from the Italian. He kind of used a florid biblical language, But I remember Kenneth Clark was talking about his prophecies and how he used them to express his opinions on things. But I'll read you a short excerpt of Leonardo's prophecies. And he's talking about us, and he's calling us animals, which, I mean, I think we are. You know, when I paint the meat, I'm thinking of, I'm thinking of the meat in terms of flesh. It's all our flesh. It's not just meat to be consumed. It's also about life in the flesh. So here's Leonardo speaking about us animals. By their strong limbs, we shall see a great portion of the trees of the vast forests laid low throughout the universe, and when they are filled with food, the satisfaction of their desires will be to deal death and grief and labor and wars and fury to every living thing, and from their immoderate pride they will desire to rise towards heaven, but the too great weight of their limbs will keep them down. Nothing will remain on earth or under the earth or in the waters, which will not be persecuted, disturbed, and spoiled. And in other writings of prophecies, one that he calls of sheep, cows, goats, and the like, he says, endless multitudes of these will have their little children taken from them, ripped open and flayed and most barbarously quartered. And he also talks about fishes being boiled in the oceans and all the eggs, all the fish eggs that we eat, destroying the life that was in the eggs, very animal-centered, human-centered kind of, where he brings the two together and calls cows who instead of it, So it was really exciting to discover that just the other day. And here's another art historical example, Rembrandt's Slaughtered Ox. And different writers will talk about how, the suspension and the pose is like a crucifixion scene. The sacrifice of the animal and the use of the animal, and the whole Catholic thing with the Word made flesh, and this whole thing about flesh sacrifice and Jesus being kosher. By the way, I always like to kind of think about Jesus being, what a lot of sects would call the perfected sacrifice, because he's flesh and he's kosher, in that supposedly there are no bones broken. So it's kind of interesting to see that flesh sacrifice taken up to Jesus historically. And here's a contemporary example, more contemporary, Hermann Nietzsche, one of the Austrian actionists, early performance art, real Catholic imagery, with the kind of this suspension thing happening again, with the splayed out limbs and, priestly robes and all this, baptism in blood and sacrifice. I'm going to go ahead and run through my lunch meat paintings, because it's kind of maybe a genre, lunch meat paintings. But this is an early meat painting called Gaseous Chaos, kind of invoking a little bit of the biblical language. I think there's some quote about gaseous chaos, swirling before matter kind of congealed. And plus, the whole gastronomical reference. This is a little decorative ham piece. Because I really like going through the grocery stores and the supermarkets and seeing these beautiful ham packages that just look very atmospheric, like, the atmosphere around the world or around Jupiter or something, really planetary. This was a reference to Mars. And now it's hanging in Libby Lumpkin and Dave Hickey's house. This one's called Pink Lady. I think there's a drink named Pink Lady. That's Kato salami with peppercorns. I was just getting into meat when I met Jeffrey Valance, my husband. He's out there. He's up there in the audience. He's going to give his lecture here next week. I think it's next Tuesday. But this was one of his curated shows in Vegas. Before they had any real art spaces to show in, he'd go into these casinos and the Magic and Movie Hall of Fame and the Cranberry World Museum. And we had a show there. He curated a show, and everybody got cranberry paint in their mailboxes at UNLV if they wanted to use cranberry paint. They were all welcome to be in the cranberry show, but this was turkey with cranberry. And it was right around Thanksgiving, so it was perfect. This was, I think, turkey with wine and song, and my Swedish gallerist bought this one, and it has a couple of little eighth notes embedded in the turkey up there, kind of. So, pimento loaf. This one's called Una Momento. When they talk about a painting being an event, you know, this is one moment. But also, I think, you know, painting the meat, too, is a reminder for myself to try, never works, but to try to live in the moment and to try to be here now, you know. Ram Dass from the 60s, that whole be here now thing, you know. Try to not judge and constantly either live in the future or in the past. You know, and I like making canvases and paintings with a living presence. You know, something that can kind of almost cause maybe a visceral movement or a relationship with the viewer that's visceral. This is a large, well, not 4-foot square shaped panel. And this is called Smear Campaign. Kind of, I was thinking a little bit of Nixon, you know, Jeffrey's influence. But, you know, especially after undergrad school, when all the art historians, you know, are telling you lurid stories of all those cold steel, almost surgical, minimalist sculptures, you know, like Donald Judd metal bars or something, and you're going, oh, you know, then it's trying to kind of invest painting or invest art with some kind of living presence again, maybe. And I think partly just making the meat paintings are also, maybe it stems from some base desire paired with a yearning for beauty. I don't know, you know. But this is St. Luke in the round, and actually Jeffrey Valance up there, he found an image of St. Luke in a piece of meat in a meat handbook. Incidentally, this meat handbook was borrowed from the UNLV library, and it had all these really lame drawings of nude girls, nude women in different poses. The meat handbook. So. But this is St. Luke, and he's this is very like a pose of a painting done by El Greco of St. Luke. And St. Luke is, very appropriately, the patron saint of artists and butchers. So St. Luke is, you know, but yeah, this is the simulacra he found. And the painting that El Greco made of St. Luke has the same turn of head, the same weak eye on one side, you know, the same collar and the same direction of hair moving up there on the top. So I kind of like making carnal decor, carnal decor in a way. I forgot who bought this in Sweden. I think it was a man who he would have a mail library with a pipe and an old green lamp and lots of bookshelves, and so I call this Meat for the Masculine Library. It's a little bit more spare, not so ornate and florid and feminine. This one's called Hungry Baby Tripe. It's a simulacra I found of a crying baby in a piece of tripe. I had to go with that some more, so this is called Pretty Baby Tripe, and you know what gender she is, you know. This is also an early Tripe piece. Yeah, it's kind of a, some of these Tripe paintings, it's kind of a reference to those masterful, ravishing paintings of Tripe collars, like the Dutch collars that they just painted beautifully. This lacy stuff that's really found deep inside the gut of a cow. So people often ask me, oh, where do you get your frames? And some are gotten from thrift stores or antique stores or frame shops. It just depends, Just depends on when I see an ornate frame that looks like Tripe or looks like a specific cut. I have to... This is from the time I was about 6 years old, I saw this in one of the books. It was given to me by my sister. And I'm bringing in the cat reference, Poor Ali Sabatnik, once she started calling this show 9 Lives, then all these cat references started cropping up. But in my work, there's always been kind of a cat reference, because a lot of these meats I didn't know how to cook or I couldn't eat. So, especially for a while in Vegas, I ended up saving about 19 stray cats and kittens, because I would coax them in with this strange meat. I'd go, how do you cook this pork uterus? There's a language barrier at the Chinese market, so I'm just going to have to bake it and then put it out for the cats. And so I'd put it out, and these poor stray cats would come around, and I'd grab them, I'd grab their kittens, and I'd socialize the kittens, and I'd spay the mother cat, and it was always real, harder to find homes for the mother cats than anybody. I mean, nobody wants the breeder. I mean, they just want the cute little, But yeah, I'd take little cute kitten photos and put them up all over the place, and so ended up saving some animals. So, yeah, here's, more genre paintings. They did use cats a lot in these different meat paintings, too. And sometimes they were symbols of temptation, like when the cat is reaching in to grab something. Sometimes it's a reference to our animal nature, being tempted. Yeah, and this was a very amateur photo. I had to have a photo real quick of an early version of this Tripe painting, and there's one of the stray cats flitting by. Yeah, so that's honeycomb beef tripe, and it's in one of the stomachs of the cow, and it has that honeycomb texture, so that part of the stomach can suck out all the nutrition it possibly can. The surface area of the stomach is greatly multiplied by all this, honeycomb texture. Yes, this is what came before the meat, was ice cream and cones and messy banana splits. And at the time, I was positing the melting cone as this object of desire, the Lacanian object of desire. You're always chasing after it, and you never can get it. Because they just look ridiculous. Well, but they also bring pleasure. So you see some of the honeycomb beef tripe texture in the whipped cream. Yeah, so there's another meat painting, back to the tripe. And this one isn't in a collection yet, but I always visualize it hanging over some nice white couch in some area, lacy kind of. Jeffrey and I lived in Sweden for 3 years, and after Sweden, we lived as artists in residence at a Longhorn Ranch in Boerne, Texas, which is real near San Antonio. And so there was this one longhorn steer called Jelly, and it was really kind of tragic because what he loved to eat most was jelly beans. and they're made out of the hooves of cows. So it was really, but he's very sweet. He always visited the place where his friend died. He was always very near to that place. There's this, huge acreage, and he often returned to the place where his fellow steer died. And this, you come across different framing devices in art history and different strange things like Bezoars. This is called a bezoar. And it's a calcified growth that forms in a cow's stomach. If the cow eats a nail or some other foreign object that it can't digest, then this calcified growth will grow around the nail to protect the rest of the cow. So I like this little hat that they've clapped onto the top. This is from the 17th century, and this was given as a gift to Ferdinand II. And people used to think that these were magic. They had magical properties, like maybe they fended off melancholia or certain types of sickness. And other framing devices, like a monstrance, for the Catholic Church, when they carry the host in this thing, the host would normally go in the little central part. There's all this ornate, just radiating pattern shimmering around the host, the flesh, Jesus, the Word made flesh, and the whole flesh sacrifice, and the whole divine flesh idea. So that's, and ornate framing devices again. This is one of my paintings. This is called Mr. Goat Fat. And he's framed, I always hear different gallerists at the time I made this, they'd say, oh, that frame is over the top. I mean, it was just too much. It was just too much bad taste to take. So I knew that it was, so it was probably pretty good then, like on the edge or something, on the cutting edge. But yeah, because it's partly these meat paintings are too about bad taste, good taste, excess. Like, if the painting looks too good, then maybe it's not so smart. Just that kind of, that basis, that prejudice that we have. Like, well, she looks really good, so, But yeah, if a painting has too much color or too much beauty, we're always suspicious of it in our Western culture, because we know, from experience, we know that through the past, 500-600 years, the beautiful image has been used to convince us and to change our faith and all these things. So here's Mr. Goat Fat. I found the simulacra of an old, chuckling old reprobate man in some fat on some goat ribs. So I don't know if you can see him there. He kind of has a horn at the top, and his grin kind of caught up in there. And little chin, chin kind of waggles up and down when he laughs. And he's thinking about his little piece of chicken. But the satyr, he's half man, half goat, and he's driven by lust, and he's carnal in nature. This is an earlier flesh painting also, tri-tip sirloin, with another one of those gaudy carnivalesque frames. And it was used in another of those Jeffrey Valance shows that got such international attention in the late 90s in Vegas. We'd get write-ups in Art in America and Art Forum and Frieze, and different people would be coming out to see these installations in these Vegas shows. This was at the Magic and Movie Hall of Fame, and my meat painting is on an easel right beside the saw that Blackstone the magician used, where he'd put his pretty assistant on the table, and she'd lay down, and then he'd pretend to cut her in half. So I really enjoyed showing the work in that context, because you just get floods and floods of tourists in these shows, completely different crowd than the normal art crowd, and it was fun to have this installation up, because anybody would just take to mean, okay, there's the sexy assistant table where you saw her in half, and then there's the flesh, laid bare. There's the slice of meat. And it was just nice and really fun and really prankish to show in some of those museums. This is another piece of carnal decor. And I do music also. I play violin and some piano and some guitar, but mainly violin. And I was composing these pieces at the ranch near San Antonio, like these fiddle tunes, like Mad Cow Waltz and things like that. So this was a performance I did at the ranch. Here's Meat Parrot, another portrait found in meat. Bottom round this time. If you can see the parrot's beak is that big red lumpy area near the middle. Framed in a little portrait frame, Kind of reminds me of vanity too. They almost look like mirrors, like you're looking at yourself and you see the meat beyond the skin. This is called grand horizontal. It's kind of this figure, kind of like one of those grand horizontal where the dame is just spread out on the canvas like a piece of meat. This is called Homage to de Kooning. I really like one of de Kooning's quotes. He says, "What's more real than flesh?" And I go, yeah, exactly. What is more real and relevant? I mean, we're inside this. I think another thing I'm dancing around is just the idea that, well, maybe I'll get to that later. This is called Ribs for Eve. This is called Pillar of Fat. Kind of like one of those stalagmites in a cave that kind of just builds up over time, over eons, and then you can't budge it. You can't budge the fat on your own frame. French Rococo delight. This is called Lickety Split. Blooming tails. It's a drawing with a watercolor inside. And this one and the next one are called Slice of Grace. This is Slice of Grace pork shoulder. And this is Slice of Grace pork butt, which is actually the same thing, kind of. And this one is in the show. It's called Kiss the Fat. It's lamb fat. A lot of times I use some kind of like Old Testament sacrificial animal, like the ox or the lamb, dove. This is one of those prearranged paintings where I arranged the meat ahead of time, kind of almost in a performative part of the work. I arranged it into kind of this florid bouquet to fit within the frame or to fit within the context of the piece. It has this atmospheric, kind of romantic background. A lot of people think it's flowers at first, and I really like the way this one operates, or a lot of the other paintings operate, where people go, "Oh, it's beautiful. What is it?" And I say, "It's flesh," or "It's meat," and then they go, "Ugh." And it's interesting, that's when some revulsion sets in, But I think most of us have this kind of inherent, ugh, to the visceral and the wet and the gushy, the same kind of principle that operates in horror movies, with the aliens with a lot of mucus and some people even argue that that's revulsion or some kind of bias against the feminine, bodily fluids and blood and all this organic stuff. This is called Fat of the Lamb. There's a quote from Leviticus, something about the fat of the lamb shall be taken away from the sacrifice and burned upon the altar for the Lord. So it talks about all the fat being the Lord's. But I also like a quote from St. Luke, that says, "The life is more than meat." That was nice because that piece was on the cover of Meat Paper, I guess. It's a magazine out of San Francisco, and I think they started about a year and a quarter ago. This is called Eye of the Bung. It's pork bung, and when I finished this painting, and it had it in a show in Sweden, my gallerist said, I have to say this in her accent, "Wiki, what is a bung?" And, the painting had already been sold, so I just sounded positive. I just said, "What's the lower end of a pig's intestine?" And she just said, "Yaha!" And it sold to a heart surgeon, And this is also pork bung, and it's a reference to drapery studies and also that endless Baroque movement of, in Baroque music that I like to play, like the Bach double, but just this endless movement and all the labyrinthine folds. This is a smaller drawing, and it's also in the show. It took a long time to make, but I guess it's kind of childish or prankster-ish, but I kind of like the idea of, being in different shows, like, Hammer Museum, and people are peering into these ornate folds, and it's a pork bung, and they're liking it. Or, I guess philosophically you can say, yeah, you can find beauty in everything. So here's a charcoal drawing of an up close of the baby tripe. I had to render yet again. This is called Unfurling Biblical Tripe, because there's actually a tripe, different part of the stomach, different stomach in the cow that forms Bible tripe, and you'll find it in the market called Bible tripe because it's really lacy and thin and ethereal, and also like drapery studies. This is called rashers. This is called oxtail rosettes. Oh, and this one is in the show, and it's entitled "For the Carnal in Dante's Hell," because in the Inferno, in Dante's Inferno, there's a part, he describes a section of hell that has it's reserved for those with carnal natures who couldn't surrender their carnal natures and go to God. They chose to be in hell instead because of their carnal appetites. This is called Ruben Rouge, red ribbon. Everybody's wasting too much time at the computer these days, getting claw, kind of a permanent claw from using the mouse and all this. But this is when I scanned in a bunch of meat photos that I had, because I have a massive photo collection of meat that I've taken over the years. And I scanned in some photos and was looking at them and twirling them around in different filters, and these symmetrical kaleidoscopic forms came out. And initially they came out as cruciforms and different floral decorations, or looking like cathedral windows, things like that. But upon further reflection, they all looked like Satan in one part or another. So the previous piece was in a show curated by John Baldessari and Meg Cranston. It was called 100 Artists See God, and this was a kind of a takeoff show at Grand Central Arts Center, and it was called 100 Artists See Satan. So this was my piece for the Satan show. And I think my favorite is the busty demonic female figure in the middle. She was from goat fat. There were these globules of goat fat that I had photographed. But I think that the one in the far right looks kind of like a Satan found on the Shroud of Turin. But yeah, here's some of the cruciforms that I found. This is reindeer flesh. You know, elevating the flesh to holiness, holy images, light-filled, kind of like crown jewels or ornate Catholic crosses. That, you know, I like how this seems to have kind of a light within some of them. I think the fat really holds the light well. And this is, you know, I guess Catholics kiss the cross a lot, so this is a cross that can kiss you back. And getting on into the reindeer slaughter, when Jeffrey and I lived in Sweden, you know, we had a Sami student. The Sami people are the Laplanders or the Laps, but that term got used so much that it became derogatory because a lot of the regular Swedes kind of looked down on the Laps and the Sami people. But nowadays, the Sami are the only ones that are legally allowed to own reindeer. They're the indigenous people of northern Russia and Finland and Norway and Sweden. And they do different things like hunt and fish and get on the internet and surf. And I know, several of them on Facebook that we keep in contact with. But they herd reindeer and they breed and herd reindeer also. So this is called Reindeer Slope, and it's a painting from the reindeer slaughter I saw of the Sami in Sweden. And when I was there, you know, our Sami student invited me there to witness the slaughter, and it was very different in that it wasn't a ritualistic affair like I expected anything like that. It was just a slaughterhouse on wheels. It was this white semi matching the snow that pulled up in this clearing in the snow, and real fast they opened the back doors and they started, you know, leading reindeer in, and then they'd come out the other end swinging on meat hooks. It was just very fast. But it was horrifying to see and very tragic, and you know, when I was invited to see the slaughter, I just thought, well, I'd better do this, you know, because it's something to see. And yeah, it really was. These are Pollock-esque buckets of blood at the reindeer slaughter. They just reminded me of Jackson Pollock's buckets, you know. They were making blood sausage, so they were constantly, you know, stirring the blood. And this whole vision of the blood on the snow and the ice that was frozen into the snow was just it was dazzling and beautiful, and at the same time really scary and tragic. But that's me photographing different things. There's the river of blood at the Sami reindeer slaughter. It's interesting, though, that the Swedish art student, her father recently died, and he was a real luminary artist. He was a real important Sami artist. And ever since the Swedes, I think about maybe a couple hundred years ago, ever since the Swedes herded a bunch of Sami shaman into a cave and killed them all, then they've been kind of real quiet about their own beliefs and own rituals. But, you know, we know he was a shaman as well. So, you know, his name is Lars Pirak, and her name was Katarina. There she is, Katarina at the reindeer slaughter holding an omentum. That's a reindeer omentum. It's that lacy stuff just hanging right around the stomach that Dr. Oz always tells us to keep small. But yeah, it was interesting to talk to the Sami people at the reindeer slaughter too. You know, there was some language barrier now and then, But I was talking with one of the guys that regularly headed those and directed them, and he said, yeah, sometimes a slaughter can be beautiful. And, you know, it was interesting because there was a woman that you know, we couldn't talk. There was a translation thing, but she said, "Oh, you paint meat? You paint flesh and you think it's beautiful? Oh, I've got to show you these things that I've always thought were beautiful, you know, beautiful parts of the reindeer." And so she started just bringing me out different parts that were steaming in the cold air, you know, like this omentum. She brought that out. This is Katerina, our student, holding it up. This is a piece of reindeer viscera. I'm using it in a vertical format to kind of reference the figure. And this is called Reindeer burqa shroud. You can kind of see where the head goes in the top. This is called Reindeer priapus. It's called Reindeer shot put, because it looks like a guy hurling a shot put. You know, that sport where they bend over and... This is a painting called Flight of the Reindeer, and it's in the show. On the Sami shaman drum, when he goes into trance, the reindeer symbol painted on the drum is kind of a symbol that talks about that trance. It's the symbol for the shaman's trance or the shaman's vision. So it's really interesting that we use the, you know, we think of reindeers in terms of taking Santa up into the sky for this flight, and it's also in Laplandic lore as being a symbol of the shaman's trance. You know, the symbol of the reindeers symbolizes the shaman's trance, shaman's visions, shaman's flight. This is more reindeer viscera. So these next three pieces are in the show also. These, you know, these took some months to do. But I enjoy the vertical format because it's about life size and we kind of relate to it viscerally and personally, face to face. And since they take hours and hours and weeks and months, you know, different things dance along in your mind as you're just, you know, pulling out technical details like, oh, what does this look like? You know, it looks kind of like it's kind of dancing along like this with this florid kind of face and you know. So it's really, this is kind of a dragon-like piece of reindeer viscera, kind of taking off that away, in my mind anyway. Yeah, and you start making weird sound effects. You're painting along, you're going, how does the dragon sound? You know, kind of gurgling and wet, visceral. That's more reindeer viscera. Yeah, and this one's kind of hopping along on 2 feet, kind of one weak leg. This is a new piece also, and it's in this show. It was nice to break away from the frame for this one, but it's reindeer viscera, and a lot of times, you know, because of the organic forms, you know, in the flesh, I really love painting just different organic growths and forms that just kind of follow the path of least resistance in the air, and they grow out this way and they fold out that way. It kind of reminds me of the artist's shamanic kind of role in society. Or our act of creation, whether it's divine or, oh, no, not divine. You know, that whole kind of thing we've got going. But the little man up there near the center, a lot of people see it, say, hey, you know, did you really put him there on purpose? And I said, yeah, but he was already there, too. You know, the little man near the center kind of looks like a burly Nixon or something. I think that's the last piece. Yes, that's the last piece. What? Thank you. Thanks. What questions, you know, what comments or questions?
We have microphones for the questions and comments.
Yeah. comes some microphones.
Yeah, I have two things. One is a remark and one is a question. When you say that Leonardo da Vinci says who to a cow, that's, English language is probably an exception in that, because in all European languages it's either all living creatures would be who, ants included, or in some there is no difference at all. It's always who, even if it's a chair or a desk or a.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear.
Yeah, well, yeah. But my question is, when, how do you keep the meat unspoiled when you pose it for painting? I assume that you take a picture and then use the photo as a basis for painting. Yes.
Mostly, yes.
And then the question is, why do you paint? Why don't you just photograph and stick to the photograph? What process, what transformation, brings the painting to the whole thing?
Yeah. I really like that last question too. Why do you paint it? Well, different answers come to mind, and that's kind of why I've been circling around it for about 10 years. Why? Why do I paint these things? I mean, I can kind of dance around it, but as long as I'm coming out at, I'm making them visual. I'm not making them words, and I'm not making them photographs. I'm kind of rendering them myself, kind of creating them myself and modeling them and forming them slowly. And there's that whole art historical reference of creating, like the canvas being kind of a skeletal structure, and then the whole Venetian art of painting flesh where you're layering very thin skins upon top, on top of each other, and the light filters through the different glazes and bounces around, and this whole kind of forming flesh, But yeah, I wonder that myself, why. But yeah, photographs do seem more mechanical, and I can tweak them and mess with them and, artifice them. I can artificially bump up contrasts and bring out the little man, and, I can artificially and artfully kind of change things and create meat my own way. One person said, "Hey, Vicky, maybe you're just kind of birthing things over and over again in these meat paintings." I don't have any kids. Go, "Oh God, maybe so." These lumpy forms of misshaped meat. Who knows? Does that kind of answer a little bit? Okay. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Maybe a strange question, but since you deal with meat so much and you probably paint it for long hours, just watch it for long hours, do you ever dream of meat? What are your dreams like?
Oh gosh. Let's see. Yeah. Well, I do dream of it. A lot of times I've had these lucid dreams of being found in a cave, and then this dripping cave seems like a deep throat or something, and then I journey through different areas and forests and, meeting all kinds of different textures and basins with water in them and things like that. But also, yeah, these horrible, really heart-rending cat dreams I have that, where like sometimes, I guess if I'm in bad shape or the world isn't treating me well, then these poor little like starving or suffering cats show up. I've even had them show up in dreams carrying their own organs in their mouths, just kind of walking along, and they're in such dire straits they're carrying their organs around. So yeah, it's... But I think the worst aspect of being a flesh painter is when you smell the decaying flesh. I mean, it's the super reminder of our, the nature of living in this flesh, because you're smelling this decay, and it's the worst smell in the world. It's just repulsive, and it's scary, and it's, I think it's viscerally very, very basic in our mind to be revolted, because it's decay and it's dangerous, but also it's just a reminder of our own mortality.
I was wondering whether, I guess, two-part question, whether there's been any reaction, positive, negative, from the animal rights community. And I also apologize, I came in maybe 15 minutes late, so I don't know whether you talked about your own dietary habits, and be curious about that.
Oh, uh-huh. Let's see. Let me think about the dietary habits first. In the past, sometimes I have been vegetarian, and I do try to limit my meat intake, Not so very much. I've had some of it, but in menudo, for instance. But, oh yeah, and earlier on, I talked about Leonardo and his love for all animals and his support of that, and I was kind of trying to let him kind of speak through me in an indirect way. And, hey, I'm with good company, these artists that, that speak of animals and their murder and death as something very cruel that these humans are inflicting on them. But not very often. The majority of the work is always received positively because they see it as a metaphor for indulgence, and they see it as a metaphor for human excess and indulgence and flesh rather than just meat to be consumed. But now and then there's, it does cause maybe, I think I heard one comment early on in this show. I think a woman said, "Oh, not for vegetarians." I'm going, well, okay, but you're meat too, So I think, but there is something instinctive. Leonardo got in great trouble. A lot of his drawings were supposedly destroyed. I'm just starting to look into this, so I can't say for sure on any of this. But from what I understand, some of his anatomical studies were destroyed because the Vatican considered them sacrilegious, because it was plumbing the depths of mysteries better left a mystery, better left a divine mystery. So he was said, don't be looking into people's bodies and plumbing those depths. And I think it's just this whole instinctive thing we have, this problem we have of living in the flesh.
Well, based on that, would you be potentially interested in making similar type paintings based on human flesh, if you could gain that access?
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, that would be very wonderful.
Have you looked into it yet? You want someone to do that for you?
Oh, please. That would be great, yeah.
Will do.
That's the best.
Hi, I noticed in a lot of your paintings, the meat, like in this one you said, you see a man like Nixon, or the meat turns, looks like something else itself. Do you go out looking for that, or it almost seems like you're so upfront about the meat that it's just meat, but then it's almost like a trope when it's turning away from what it actually is and it becomes something besides the meat itself?
Gosh, well, you put that really well. It kind of operates like that. I mean, I would say that it really operates that way. And then it turns back into the flesh. It turns back into the meat.
I just want to say I understand this art a little more because I'm from Texas as well. And I've seen so many pastures as a kid growing up in Texas with cattle, and my granddad owned a ranch as well. And I've always thought of food different from the actual beauty of looking at the cattle. But this has brought a totally different perspective from the time you slaughter the cow and the actual meat before you eat it. And psychologically, I've seen the beauty of the process. And I thank you for that.
Oh, neat. Thanks. That sounds great. Thank you.
Hi. So, first of all, thank you for your art. You're one of the most talented artists I've listened to, like, honestly. My question is, are you thinking of, or have you considered painting brain? Like lamb brain?
Yes. That would be a really neat mix. What he was talking about, that would be a really neat mix of, well, the old Greek mind-body split and these definitions we have that really are, what's happening inside, this soul and body and mind and brain. Yeah, we make divisions where they're very inaccurate divisions, and the brain idea would be a great image, I think. But at this point, I'm trying not to feed the industry. I mean, I'm trying not to cause more demand to go up, so I'm really relying on, my photographs almost exclusively, because I don't want to buy any more meat, you know what I mean, to create any more demand than there is. So maybe if you got some good brain photos, or we could see an operation or something, a human brain, that'd be nice. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's right. It's the lighting and all that, sometimes it's hard, or it's behind plastic, or it's squashed behind plastic. That would be good. Yeah. Because, let's see, I forget, or Carol something, who wrote The Pornography of Meat, and they also, she and somebody else also wrote a similar book to The Pornography of Meat, and it talks about the chicken breasts packed in plastic and the flesh just bulging out, looking really excessive, and she likens this type of presentation of the chicken inside the plastic to women and, chick, and this whole thing about, nice looking chick and chicken and meat, and this whole reference between women as a piece of meat and chicken is something to, something that's come up.
Do you witness a lot of slaughtering and stuff, or do you go get the meat at the store?
Don't witness much slaughtering at all. It was just the reindeer slaughter. Of all things, to see a reindeer slaughter, I mean, before I moved to Sweden, I didn't even know that reindeer were quite real for sure. But yeah, I don't see slaughtering except for the reindeer that went in one end of the white semi-truck and came out the other.
Hi. I have just two comments. I was interested in the fact that you describe many times your work as trying to bring in the living presence into painting. So I thought it was interesting for me to see that you associated these images that are, of course, associated to the death of the animal as something that speak about the living. And also make me think about your painting, looking at your work, that if it is true, then in a sense, as you say, mention all these visceral, repulsive, and wet aspects, but in the same time, somehow, it make me think about the same underlying forces that give form to nature, that they are not so different from inside our body or from the way a rock is formed or a river, and so kind of this uncanny similarity of the world that we come to understand it or perceive it. Mm-hmm. Is something that you think also about? Or
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. The organic formations in trees and, I mean, in rocks. And like, you know, I used this phrase I've been thinking of recently, the path of least resistance, where something starts growing this way, or a limb grows out this way, or a stream takes this course. And yeah, and I think about those, you know, organic forms and like looking above from a plane or something. And the visceral type thing you're talking about, it's kind of, I try to, yeah, it's caused by the death of an animal, and that's, you know, that's part of what the work is showing, but it's very, I try to kind of inject some life back into it, kind of, it's art, you know, it's art and it's not the real flesh, but it's so funny because flesh is so literal. Well, or I don't know, literal is a weird word to use when you're thinking about flesh, talking about flesh, but you know, they're very representational, and as de Kooning would say, what's more real than flesh? I mean, we can't ignore that it's flesh. It's kind of a circular thing about it reinvesting at least a canvas or art with, or artifice, or some kind of strange human construct and putting some organic movement back into it, or some living blood, or something that I can relate to a little bit, instead of some cold steel sculpture standing there coldly. You know, I mean, you know, some people might say, oh, Vicky, that's just your way of trying to relate to people, you know, because we all have this sick desire to just, oh, let's all be friends. Oh, no, we can't. No. You know, yes, let's all be friends. Let's all be hugging. Let's all return to the womb. Let's all have this be in this bath of, you know, flesh just touching us everywhere, you know, this kind of thing with art, you know, that I'd like to kind of invest some art with. Are there any more questions?
Most people here, and yourself also, are talking about this deep, mythical, fatal, cosmological aspects of the beauty of flesh or meat. But there is also a part that I really enjoy looking at meat and eating meat. And when I see a meat in a market or in your pictures, there is this aspect of true joy, you know, because it's food, it has texture, I imagine the smell of it, it looks fresh, and etc., etc. This, you know, carnival aspect of, joyful aspect of meat, and you should sometimes mention it too, I guess. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Your meat is not really dead meat, because you give them a lot of animation. It seems to be, they have a spiral movements. And you know, in art you have the S, the beauty of S. So you really give life to dead meat. Also, you think of Shylock. I wonder if you ever sort of give the name of a pound of flesh to one of your paintings.
Oh, that would be a wonderful title.
That would be a good title, yeah. This animation is interesting that you make it moving.
Oh, great. That's wonderful to hear. That's great, yeah. Keep it moving, huh? Alive and kicking. Yeah, I try to. I get bored easily, I think, so I try to give it a kind of a baroque or rococo endless movement and rhythm. Oh, that's good. That's good. Any other questions? Should we wrap it up? Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming.